Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian and this is of course another CK3 FAQ Analysis video. Today we're going to go over the medieval map questions and most likely, if we can get it done, and I think we can, we're going to be talking about warfare. Now as you know, in these videos I pick, only the most interesting questions, at least as far as I'm concerned. If you see any questions that I skipped that you would like to have, a bit of a focus on, then we can definitely do that. Just let me know about it in the comments. And speaking of comments, I selected 9 of the most interesting comments in the comment section. There were plenty more. Of course, thank you all for the engagement, thank you all for the interest in discussing CK3. It is what, at the end of the day, keeps my excitement going, because it's just so interesting to see all of the different angles and takes that can be on that game. Before we look at the comments, I want you to know why I am doing that comment section in the video. Essentially, I want to showcase comments after I, of course, made them, quite anonymous here. But I want to showcase comments that essentially facilitate discussion. Not all comments that I will be posting is an opinion that I share. Not all comments are an opinion that I disagree with. Sometimes I will literally have nothing to say about it more than, maybe, oh, that's a fair point. I just want to show you comments in case you missed them, so that you maybe gain a different angle, as I gained a bit of a different angle when I read the comments. So with that being said, and without further ado, because these videos are already fairly long, this one is probably going to be about 25 minutes, we'll see about it when we get to it. Let's talk about comments. Pressing a courtier's claim will make them your vassal. This changes everything. Seriously, pressing Rando's claims was almost always useless in CK2. That is a comment that, in my opinion, so I do have something to say about this one, that deserves a bit of a footnote, because if I have a claim, and of course if I just push their claim, unless they're close family, but by the way, that is never actually detailed in the game as far as I know. If they're close family, they will become your vassal. But if they're not close family, and you just push somebody's claim that is just in your court, it's entirely useless. They literally will just be independent. They will ignore you. Yes, they will be thankful, but that won't even necessarily translate into any sort of alliance, because, that mostly functions via marriages, of course. And the way I see this, there is a bit of a footnote here, because you can take any given courtier that has a claim that you care for, hand them any given title, for example, just a barony, and then you can still push the claim. And the way I see this, it is quite easy to do in CK2 Vanilla. I know that the Historical Immersion project, and I might have it slightly wrong, but for balance purposes, for mechanics purposes, essentially they made it so if I am an emperor and I want to push a kingdom tier claim, I may need to make sure that the vassal that I'm pushing it for is at the very least a duke, so one level underneath whatever I'm pushing. That is the minimum. If he's just a baron, he's just going to go independent. I think that makes sense in CK2 when it comes to game balancing purposes, but I will also say that I don't actually think that that is very historically immersive, because at the end of the day, if you have a very weak vassal, if he's practically in your court because you just gave him a barony right around the corner, then he won't have the guts to say, I'm now independent, screw you. He would say, you know what, okay, at least for a certain time, maybe even if it is just tributaryship, I swear a certain degree of fealty to you. And I really like that about HIP, because it reacts the right way to a very easy and exploitable CK2 mechanic. However, the comment, in my opinion, is very, very much correct when it comes to courtiers being quite useless. Unless you have land to give out so that you can then push the claim, it's quite useless to ever push the claim of anybody that does not hold any land. In CK3, I think it's a good change, personally, that, pressing a courtier's claim will make them your vassal, mostly because at the end of the day in CK3, courtiers that have a claim aren't eternally in your court. They will eventually say, you know what, I'm out, I'm going to a different court where maybe somebody is promising me to push my claim. And I think that makes it so that courtier claims are rarer and more interesting unless they are of your direct family. So I think that is definitely positive. I think it's the right reaction to the CK2 Vanilla system, but it's a point, that in its magnitude I hadn't really considered like that, I suppose. I like the earlier dates only for extending the timeline, so having earlier dates is always welcome to me. See, I'm not against this. I can't say anything for or against it at all. I think I detailed, or I brought that up in the last video, where essentially I said 867 and 1066. Yeah, I personally, 936 for example would be a nice date, but generally speaking, I understand where they're coming from on the angle of reducing start dates. It makes a lot of sense to me. But I can definitely see this angle. I think it's important to highlight that this angle exists, and that it's a decent one. There's nothing wrong with going a bit earlier and having a bit more depth when it comes to the early developments of the medieval ages. If you think about it, I know that's a topic that Paradox hasn't touched in CK at all, but the schism, the way it actually happened between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church, is something that isn't really touched upon, of course. And I think that can be changed. If you go further back, it can become a proper, you know, fight, a fisticuffs between the Pope and the Pentarchy. I think that's interesting. I think that's something we should be looking at. If we go with any further start dates at any point, if we get that, then I think that would be a mechanic that I would 100% want to see extended. Wait, you skipped the most important things on there. You can name your pets, no more endless mittens, no more picking from the same name as same 4 dog or horse names. You can have a Scooby. That's right, that's a great comment. I did skip over that, but I know that it's important. I know that that is a really cool tidbit. I agree. On the topic of starting dates, I'm less interested in the later start dates and more interested in the earlier ones. I love the Dark Ages and Pagan Cult mods, for example, and I love to see some of those ideas make their way into CK3. I got no opinion. I think it's just an interesting take. Kind of disappointed that there is no post-Norman invasion 1066 start. That avoided the silly things that happened with CK2's invasion CB, and most of England is held by Norman lords instead of a bunch of angry Anglo-Saxons who install someone else right away. I do agree. Especially 1066 in particular is like such a good start date, be it before or after the invasion of William. But yeah, I agree. I'm somewhat worried because it's difficult to assume that the AI would go on, you know, in 1066 and actually do what historically was done, where in the south there was a bunch of Norman lords that got installed, and then in the north there were rebellions by the Anglo-Saxons that were in a very bloody, in a very aggressive way, were ended by the new Norman overlords. I think that is something that you just really don't see to that extent in CK2 1066 start dates, but it would be lovely, yeah. I mean, I agree. A post start date, I mean, you know, you wouldn't have to change that much, I guess, but at the end of the day, it depends on how the invasion of England really plays out if William were to win. I would wish, I'll be honest with you, for like a set of special events where the vassals get choices, and then it's either a bit of a purge or it isn't, and we could go from there. But I don't know, it's something that we haven't explored too much yet when it comes to knowing about AI behavior. I think all of us that we are outside of the CK3 project, it's difficult to assume. I hope that it works, but if it doesn't, yeah, good point. I like earlier start dates. It enables a different take on history, like Norse in India or Carling's Chinese Empress. My favorite start date is 769 Charlemagne's start date. I can do a quick Roman restoration or Battle of Poitiers Part 2, or my favorite early Russian Empire, etc. I would have lost my marbles if they implemented 476 as a start date, saving the Western Roman Empire, taking Visigoths to the British Isles, causing early schism and deciding its merits. We can have a ton more alternative universes. Got nothing to say. Interesting take. Know what I want to see? Being a rival or even the ruler's vassal of a king, who is also the head of the dynasty, and then pumping up the brother of that guy so he can put him out and become himself to a rival of the ruler, trying to become the head and probably the king too. I want to see how this can be used as a weapon, if it can be. So this is an interesting comment. I actually hearted it, as you can see. I very rarely actively react unless someone makes me laugh or it's like a super good input or a thing that I missed, for example. But this is a really good comment in my mind, because what we're looking at effectively is something that isn't CK3. You can technically make a family member of a different family significantly stronger by giving them land, making them the head of the dynasty, but you won't really be able, for example, to do that. You know, you can't go and promise, hey, I'll make you stronger if you disinherit that guy. If you could do that, I think there would be really sweet interaction. And Outlook, could you get out of here? Thank you very much. I think there would be a really sweet interaction. I personally would highly endorse that. I would be very, very happy with that. Cool idea. It's something that already works, but you can't reap the rewards, you know what I mean? Like, you can definitely purge someone out of being head of dynasty by making someone else stronger, but you won't really directly receive any sort of results. That would be pretty cool, yeah, that's a cool one. My question, why the spite to remove Carantania and its culture from the game? I just want to clarify this one. Effectively, I don't think there's any spite. I just want to make clear that people developing games want to develop games. They want to develop games that are fun, that are good, that are accurate, especially in the case of Grand Strategy. They don't sit down and say, oh, today I'm going to make Bavaria smaller. I mean, you know, at the point where maybe they do. Listen, no. What I what I want to say is, don't think that people do something, you know, to harm a group of people, for example, personally, especially when it comes to making games. It's just that when you make these maps, when you work on these, when you work them out, there will always be inaccuracies. You will always forget about things. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, Carantania in particular in CK2 was kind of left on the wayside for a while. And that's just because it is such a little known culture that developed over a very long period of time, of course, and existed to that degree. But what I mean to say is, for example, it's much easier to focus on implementing more German cultures in comparison to Carantanian. I personally would love to see Carantanian. It doesn't seem like that will make it in at launch, and that is what it is. But please don't feel like you're being personally attacked, because I can assure you no person in any working environment would do that. It's really more about the fact that I think, you know, in a development process, there's going to be inaccuracies anywhere. Like at any point, whatever you do, there will always be a certain degree of inaccuracy. And I mean, they did pretty well with this map. I can only hope that, you know, whatever, like the Carantanian issue, for example, whatever exists, I just hope that that will get fixed in time. Now, let's move on to the last one about the starting date. Some people like to play specific characters that are unavailable on the preset start dates. One good example is El Cid, which is present as a landed character only in a limited time frame. Good point. Got nothing to say on it, and we can now finally jump into the topic of the medieval map. Medieval map is one of the more interesting ones, generally speaking, I guess, because it's just such a huge upgrade. I mean, just look at this son of a gun. CK2, my god, what were we doing? This is 2012 style. Yeah, that's really like the old tech. That's old tech, and then of course I got it right here. This is new tech, but more on that map in a second here. Will we be able to change the terrain type through scripts as results of events or whatnot? No. The thing about this is, I understand why this isn't in. I understand why this isn't in any way, I think, something that they really care about implementing, mostly because at the end of the day, historically speaking, it didn't happen that much. Yes, you could argue, for example, as Brandenburg was slowly but surely settled by German settlers, you know, in the time frame of the game, it could possibly at some point go on and become a different terrain, such as farmlands, and that is of course true, but the farmlands don't really in CK3 exist, and neither in CK2 or any other grand strategy game for that matter. They don't really exist as farmlands to say there are farmlands here and nowhere else. They exist because they are such a dominant factor in that part of the world. For example, you know, I mean, what comes to mind is the heart of France, or for example, the, I think the Rhine-Main area, right? But I think what we need to understand is that the terrain, of course it changed technically, you know, we got rid of forests and yada yada, but at the end of the day, they were always way more hardcore centers in certain terrain things. Now, I think some things also, historically speaking, changed, particularly thinking of the swamps in England. I might be wrong in the time frame, but I believe that there was a lot of unswampening going on at the time, and I agree that would be cool if that was in, but it's also like a bit of a niche case. What I miss, and I will just say that outright, what I do think, if this were possible but not implemented, I think it would be really nice for mods. I think mods could do so well. If you, for example, let's say you make a fantasy mod, let's say it's an original fantasy mod, you make one where there's some sort of corruption creeping over the land, and you know, slowly but surely you see the entire map turning grey or dark or whatever the hell it is, right? Think of a Sauron-style person destroying all of the forests of the world, that sort of stuff. The fact that that can't be implemented is quite saddening in my opinion, because that would be really, really cool, but I think at the end of the day, you gotta understand, you gotta take the idea of, you know, how implemented would it be in the base game? And I don't think it would be very implemented. There are some niche cases, but again, remember, farmlands doesn't mean this is the only place where people farm. It's just, here's a hyper high concentration of farmlands. Now, with that being said, am I correct in thinking I see empty baronies where we'll be able to construct additional cities, temples, castles, same as empty holding slots in CK2? Correct. Not all holdings will be constructed at game start, so you'll have to build them later on in the game. I think this is good. I know that a lot of people, and I can see the angle 100%, I can see a lot of people that essentially say, and I mean, we've had it in so many series on the channel as well, that essentially say, yeah, but like in CK2, since the baronies aren't on the map, even if you have a county that doesn't have many baronies, you're looking at a situation where you can build another barony. You know, you'll get these incredibly, extraordinarily expensive events that essentially ask you, hey, you want one empty slot? And then you just say yes, spend a boatload of money, and then you can build another slot. And I think while that is cool, it's honestly also a bit spammy, and I'm mostly talking game mechanics wise. What I mean by that is, of course, that certain areas over time will become more urbanized, more dense, and might warrant more baronies. But the problem with baronies, and I will say this very nonchalantly because I think it's a really nonsensical part of the game. The problem with baronies is, if I sit down, right, to build a barony in my capital that just got a new slot, I'll just build that barony. Most of the time, because I already hold everything, you know, that I want to hold, I'll hand it out to a vassal, and then maybe I'll build 2 or 3 buildings that are important to me, be it ships, be it piety to liege, be it, you know, whatever it is, but I'll never think of the barony again. What they went for with the entire building, barony and county system in CK3, from the looks of it, whether it works I cannot say, but from the looks of it, what they went for is essentially, hey, you know what, we have a situation here where there is so much goddamn micro, or you just ignore it. And we need to boil it down to the core principles, to what makes building good. And building is fun and building is good in any game if you see the impact much more than just a percentage modifier. So having a limited amount of baronies, having a limited amount of county buildings and duchy buildings that you can build actually gives you more variety than being able to construct 100 baronies, even in the empty provinces of the steppe, and, well, then sitting there with that. I think it's fair. I think it's fair to do it like that. I can see the other angle, of course, as well, where you're like, yeah, but I want the density represented, but I think that can be done simply by virtue of having models on the map, which of course aren't there yet, but I think that does a better job than having a spam of baronies, and you know, I'm not a big fan of that at all. Like, building tall in CK2 is mostly tedium, and I'm very happy that they're taking a different approach there, where I can enhance my location without having to click, click, click. It's just there's a lot of tedium, minor changes in there that I personally in CK2 have always found a bit odd, because that's not really what CK as a franchise to me was ever about, the heavy, very heavy micro building. Roughly how many baronies are in the game compared to cities in Imperator provinces in EU4? More than EU4? Unsure how it will compare to Imperator. Empty baronies are considered owned by the county holder. For that one I really only want to mention that Imperator I think is very difficult to compare to CK2, because at the end of the day, every county that contains, let's say, 2 to 5 baronies, right? Every county could theoretically be its own nation. In Imperator, cities are not meant to be their own nations. They fulfill a different gameplay and historical purpose. If you have every city independent in Imperator, just fast forward it by like 10 years, like not even more than that, and you'll all of a sudden have like this highly conquered area, because cities just aren't meant to really survive on their own. You see it on Crete, for example, in Imperator. They just all fall at the start of the game, whereas I've seen counties survive 100 years in Crusader Kings. I think you can't compare it, but of course the map is considerably larger. It's part, I think it's amongst essentially the map generation of also Imperator. I think with Imperator and with Crusader Kings III, we have entered a new level of map density, but I'm very excited to see what the Historical Immersion project does with that. I mean, my god, the map density, it could be so dense. I would be very excited. What is probably the projection of the CK3 map? It is a bespoke projection that we developed in-house to fulfill requirements specific to CK3, and so it doesn't correspond to any standard projection or previous PDS title. I've wondered about that for quite some time, and I've wondered about this because of Estonia. Estonia looks so weird to me. I can't be the only one, right, that looks at Estonia and says, you look kind of scuffed, you look kind of weird, you look kind of like, whoop, what happened there? But it is very obvious that this map projection, despite me feeling very strangely about Estonia, is actually quite accurate, even in Estonia as a region at the end of the day. But what is more important to me, and I wanted to highlight that, it's not that important, all things considered, but just check this out, right? This is what this looks like and what it should look like on any given map. I never noticed that. Oh my god, before CK2 came along, or rather before CK3's maps came along, I never noticed that the lower half of the Mediterranean is just gone. They made it disappear. And I also thought about this, because I was like, Estonia looks like exactly how I expected to look in CK2, and then I was like, you know, but do other parts of the world? I want you to realize, because I didn't realize this, and if you did, then definitely props to you. I in all these years of playing this game, I never realized this, but this is Lake Baikal. We're like actually in Mongolia here. I thought, you know, that we were essentially looking at the western parts, like the western fringes of Mongolia, but this is literally core Mongolia with Lake Baikal. As you can see it right here, Lake Baikal. Isn't that wild? Like right here is actually China. I thought essentially in CK2 that we were looking at a map where roughly here would be Mongolia, and then all the way over here, like maybe over here is China. But nope, this is actually just core Mongolia. It's honestly, I was very surprised, but I do think it speaks positively for the map projection. Will the Aztecs show up on the shores of Europe in CK3? No, I'm disappointed. How dare you? I like the Aztecs. But speaking on the Aztecs, I marked this question not to say that. What I marked it for was that I think, besides, of course, you know, not being historically accurate, I mean, the Aztecs did not invade medieval Europe. But I think the problem of the Aztecs and also the Mongols in the CK2 wasn't that they existed, but that they never fell apart. HIP really does that well, where the Mongols invade, they will take a huge chunk of land and then they will split into Chagatai, into the Ilkhanate, into the Golden Horde, making it so that you can still keep playing on that map without regretting that you now have this Mongol monstrosity in your face. I think and I hope that the Mongols are implemented similar to that, where at some point they naturally split, because even if that is of course against the idea of agency in Crusader Kings, it just makes the map more interesting, because event spawn troops carry you to a point where you are then afterwards unbeatable, and that is something that I think we should avoid. That's really why I marked this question. Now, with the map stuff proceeding, or rather with the map stuff done, let's move to warfare. Probably one of the more contentious issues, although I don't really want to frame it as contentious, because I don't think people are fighting over this. I don't think people are angry over this necessarily. I think people at the end of the day look at warfare as I don't know, I mean, I made that video, right, where I essentially talked about the intricacies of CK2 warfare and why none of them matter to anyone. And I got a lot of comments, I mean a lot of comments, that were people saying, I didn't even know about sub-commanders, I didn't even, you know, I have thousands and thousands of hours in this game and I didn't even know that I could look at that detailed troop view there. And I know that a lot of people now very positively look towards those details despite never using them. I talked about a video, I think I'm going to link it in the description if possible. I talked about a video, or about this in a video, in a newsflash, news roundup thing, with every information that we have about warfare and what it means. And I mean, my conclusion, if you've watched the video, if you haven't watched it, my conclusion was that there is a similar amount of depth in it, but it's all more accessible. All the factors are now more visible and more can be influenced much more. So that's essentially the topic that I'm going into. I know that, you know, there are a lot of people, and there is certainly justification in there, or legitimacy in there. There are a lot of people that are against this. A lot of people, for example, and I mean I'm amongst those for sure, but I just don't think it's already the case. A lot of people that look at what they've seen from the CK3 combat footages and believe that it's too close to EU4. I don't actually think it's at all close to EU4. I think the combat system is completely different from the one in EU4. Like, it's just, yeah, it's like bars, I guess. Like, visually speaking, I can see why that would be thought, but it's just not close at all in the way combat actually determines anything from everything that we've known. And my god, I've seen so much footage. But anyway, let's actually get into the question. Preludes aside here. Will there be set cultural bonuses to men-at-arms like in CK2 with retinues, or are we able to customize them if they appear at all? Not as such, but as mentioned in the DD, there are plenty of different men-at-arms that are unique to different cultures. Steppe cultures will, for example, have access to horse archers, while Greeks have access to superior heavy cavalry in the form of cataphracts. Men-at-arms are not constantly raised, unlike in CK2. They are also very different from levies, while in CK2 they were pretty similar. They are costly to change, but not prohibitively so. See, now that's an issue that I actually found quite interesting. There are of course two layers to this, because that is the entire combat system. Retinues are in CK2 culture specific. The Germans, for example, have the knights, then you have the cataphracts, etc, etc. But then also there are some culture specific buildings. Let me see if I can actually find some. There they are, look at that. So you get some heavy cavalry here, you get some bonuses on that other cultures don't get, and you can only use this building if you are of a certain culture group. So this specialization is no different from CK2, now in CK3, except it's more accessible, because instead of going into your vassal's building, and you know, I love criticizing that part of CK2, but instead of going into your vassal's building slots, you're looking at a situation where in CK3 you just build men-at-arms and you get the same bonuses, but it's much more determinable that you're getting those units because you've built those men-at-arms. I think it will make it interesting, because it means that based on the terrain and based on who you are fighting, what cultural area you're fighting, you will have to change the setup of your army. And I think that's really cool, that's really interesting. How it actually pans out, again, we don't know. I hope that every culture, so like even the minor ones, you know, if you're Franconian, that you get something in terms of like a slight specialization in comparison to Bavarian. But we'll see. We'll see about it. I mean, I could see it also not. I mean, how different really were they? The Knights of Bavaria and the Knights of Franconians. I don't think they really mattered that much. It might just be not even cultures, but like the overall cultural group, you know, German, for example. We'll have to see about that, but I think this system is just way better. It's way more accessible. It does the same thing. It makes it so that your culture is specialized in something, much like the buildings and retinues of CK2. But you just have good direct influence over it. It's way more accessible. Same system though. Any chance castle holdings can exert a ZOC, so zone of control. Not in the sense as in EU4, the hostile county attrition can be thought of as a soft ZOZ. Can't talk anymore. That doesn't hinder movement, but does have penalties for moving armies without consideration. In that aspect, I want to say, because I think that's kind of misunderstood, what they seem to suggest is already in CK2. Many people, and I didn't know it until fairly recently either, like I just wasn't aware, I didn't really care for it, right? But many people aren't fully aware that if you go into hostile or even neutral territory, so let's for example say I go to Heves, right? If you go into this territory, you will run out of supply and it will get enhanced the longer you are outside of any friendly thing. If I take for example this province right here, you know, if I occupy this, then I will have supply in all adjacent provinces. So this zone of control is already a thing in CK2, okay? That already exists. Quite important to me. But even if you are in the hinterlands, you know, in the empty territory of any enemy that you face, as long as this bar hasn't met the fortification line, you will be able to stay supplied. Okay? Meaning that this soft zone of control already existed in CK2. Now they changed it, as I understand it, they changed it to a degree where the AI will now favor going into, you know, just sieging themselves away down into you, essentially. What the AI would do 90% of the time in any war that you fight is essentially in CK2 go for your capital. That is completely nonsensical. If I am, for example, you know, if I declare a war as the King of England against, let's say, the Zirids down here, the Zirids, I guarantee it, will come up to me. They will land in London and they will say, we got him, we're gonna destroy you. It is completely nonsensical. As I understand it, with the new warfare system and the new way that the AI behaves, sometimes they will behave silly, of course, but as I understand it, that should be limited to a much more reasonable approach. It's not always going to be reasonable. This is a highly complex game, of course, but my god, CK2 has such an odd behavioral system in that sense. I love the idea of not implementing like heavy, you know, fortified zones of control where you can't pass through. It does make a lot of sense to have those. For example, you know, here in France, you can't sail down the Seine anymore for as long, or rather, as soon as this side here got reinforced with a castle level. Where can you see it? There you go, fort level. As soon as this, I think it's like 12 or something, might be 6, I can't remember. But as soon as this is overly reinforced, you cannot sail into it. I think that makes a lot of sense. That is a form of zone of control. I hope that that makes a comeback in CK3 as well. But for CK2, again, very, very similar. I just wanted to point that out because many people appear to be thinking that we're kind of looking at a situation where that is a new feature. But I think it's just a development, a logical development of the existing CK3 feature. Now let's go down here. I read before that 20 knights or so equal 200 levies. To be honest, I think that this makes knights, aside from roleplay purposes, rather useless. There's a few things to take into account here. Firstly, I would assume that I, as the ruler, am the one responsible for knighting and knighthood. I don't want to micromanage 30 to 40 minor titles, and these knights only have the power of 300 to 400 levies. So you can tell this question, by the way, was asked way before we got more combat explanation and so more footage. In the footage, actually, the feedback that I got in the comment that in the video that I made about it, people generally were like, wow, knights are way too strong. They like single-handedly each destroyed 200 to 300 people. So, you know, you can see some of these questions are quite old. Let's go into the answer here. Knight isn't as a title as such that you hand out. They default to the most capable characters within your realm based on prowess, which you then can adjust the way you want to. You can choose whether someone has to be a knight, can be a knight, or can't be a knight. That's essentially the choices you get. We already know this. The game is still in the process of being balanced. I can't say how powerful a single knight will be, but rest assured, we want knights to be powerful and a force to be reckoned with. Knights fight alongside your normal troops, but are much more powerful than any single levy or men-at-arm, dealing and taking damage much like they would. They can be wounded, captured, or worse, killed, so be careful who you send to war, or maybe do it on purpose in an unfair fight. I think this is a really interesting point, because I personally envision knights as nobles with like a bit of a personal guard, because one person killing 300 people, I mean, let's not be insane, let's just, that's a bit out there, but I like the concept of knights so much. When I play CK2, I could theoretically, I don't do it because I'm lazy, I'm very lazy, and I think the majority of people are lazy in this aspect, but I could easily go on, for example, I'm going to raise an army right here, right? And then I could, if I, oh right, you don't even have enough units here, but I could assign sub-commanders to every single one of these units, right? And when I do this, all of these characters could theoretically be in combat, you know, lose a battle, die in battle, that sort of stuff. But since nobody uses the system, barely anybody ever gets captured. I like that CK3 puts a lot of value when it comes to war score, when it comes to general interaction, to people possibly being captured, because that of course would impact your ability to fight back. If you lack your knights, you can't fight back against the enemy anymore. If you lose your son in a battle, if you lose yourself, you will have to give up in the war. I think those are really, really, really cool aspects of the knighthood system. Balancing is always something that I can't really address that until we know the game, but I will tell you straight up, man, the roleplay that will be possible. I am dreaming, and I have to keep dreaming because I know this isn't in, but I am dreaming essentially of a system in which I can negotiate, you know, hostages that then live at their court while others live at mine. Because that would be something that I would definitely love. Or maybe to the end of a war I could negotiate, you know, that I can go on and all of a sudden marry the daughter of the king that I just fought to finally make peace between our people. I think that is interesting. And that is something that the knighthood system definitely supports, so big fan of it. How well does the AI take the new attrition and foreign territory mechanic? Does this stop them from rushing your capital like in CK2? Rushing into enemy's territory will cause your army to take very heavy attrition, and the AI knows this. They will try to siege their way to the war goal area. Alright, that's what I mentioned. I should have probably not mentioned it up there then, but yeah, big fan of that. I mean, them always rushing a capital is wild. Will capturing opponents in battle still be as random as CK2, and will capturing the enemy king still give you 100 war score? Will battles do overall be more deadly and risky? Like, will you see more characters die or be captured? It's based on their presence in the battle as a commander or knight. Overwhelming victory is more likely to result in capture. Capturing the enemy ruler will win the war. Since we have a character fighting directly in the combats, knights, more characters are exposed to the dangers of combat than in CK2. It's dangerous to be a knight. Love it. I really love that. It involves characters more into a very micro-heavy warfare affair. I'm a huge fan of this. Naval combat, yay or nay? There will be no naval combat at launch, however we aren't close to that specific feature in a far future. I made a video on that. Before you get mad in the comments, I made a video on the topic of medieval naval tactics. And naval warfare could be implemented. I can see it. But I think it should mostly be trade-focused. If they revamp, in my opinion, and I know there was a huge upset, but I can't really address the naval upset. Oh, there are no transport ships anymore, because I did that in an academically researched video. But I do want to address when it comes to a rework of the system. I mean, what do you all think? I think it should be focused essentially on, you know, hey, Sicily, for example, was such a vital position in the Mediterranean because the range of navies in the Middle Ages simply wasn't long enough. You know, when the Fatimids, and I mentioned that there, I just want to cut into that very shortly, when the Fatimids made their move to Egypt, their naval capacities, their abilities were cut short because, you know, they would have to sail up the entire Levant to get even to Asia Minor, whereas when they were in Tunisia, they could just go to Sicily, they could take parts of Sicily so that they have safe ports, and then raid up the Adriatic. There was so much more ability to raid and to come back safely in certain locations in the world that I think that should play a big role, combined with the fact that, of course, trade is something and that we shouldn't underestimate, in particular for the Byzantine, for the East Roman Empire. The trade that was vital to keeping those areas alive is something that needs to be much more flexible than the CK2 trade route system. And give me one moment here. Alright, let's move on. How different are the peace negotiations going to be? Like CK2, will you only be able to use the CB you started the war for? Same as in CK2. I actually agree with this. So what I mean is, you already have so many casus belli in CK2 that aren't claim-bound. Invasions, you have jihads, I mean, you have great holy wars in general, I guess. You have, you know, everything from holy wars to just forced vassalization wars to border wars. There's so many different wars. But in medieval Europe itself, claims played a gigantic role. And I think they got devalued a lot in CK2 the more other CBs were added. So I think this is a good idea. But I think what they should add, you know, are like hostage exchanges. It should be something like loses a claim on this or that, even if it's unrelated to the direct claimant war. I think more negotiations would still be nice. I think that would be quite neat. I would be in favor of that. I wouldn't be in favor of an EU4 style system because that's just map painting at that point. And I mean, that's fair. I know that, you know, there's a huge crowd of people that endorse that, and that's good. You know, whatever really floats your boat. But it wouldn't be something very favorable in CK, I don't think, because CK should be about the characters and their stories, and if we add negotiations that can add on that, then that is good. Just blobbing doesn't really do that justice, I think. Will we get armor for character portraits? Yes, and we even saw that. They look quite neat. Will Jihads have a Jihad screen like the new Crusade screen? Yes, yes. They actually explained it and called it the directed and undirected Grand Holy Wars, essentially, where in one war you just have a goal, and then you can, you know, there's a little bit of a pool where you can pull your money and your resources, and there are claimants, you can nominate your own. It's a classic Crusade. And then there will be the other one that also gets its extra unique screen, where you have someone like, for example, a Caliph that says, we're taking that land because I'm the ruler of the world and I deserve it. So that changed way for the better. I mean, after Holy Fury, everything but Crusades felt so lackluster, but Crusades are so overpowered. Very, very good step, I think, to clean that up. Now, with that being said, if you disagree with any of the opinions that I have brought forth in this video, much like many of you disagreed, for example, with me saying I don't really care for early starters or for other start dates, let me know in the comments. If you have anything else to add, if you want any question that I skipped over here, if you want any of those debated, give me, you know, a comment. I'll note it down. We'll get to it. But for the moment, I would like to thank the members of the channel that are making videos such as this one possible, namely the Barons, Aaron, Stefan, The Richest T, Snywolf, Thomas, Mitchell, MFW, Florian Dan, The Murcielago, Jacob, Rex Romanorum, Falling Phoenix, Eterna, and Charlie. Then of course also the Counts, Shifty, Wombat, Kazen, and Lachlan, and last but not least, the absolutely beautiful Dukes, Suspicious Duck, Nathan, Jack, Kenneth, Lexo, Goodfield, Eric, Aiden, and Kiriana. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll see you later. Alligator.